if you just learn one new thing every day, you're going to be closer and closer to being able to achieve the sound you hear in your head when you're working on either your own stuff or stuff for other people. This is something I'm about to throw at you. Lots of stuff that came from an actual session where Peter Cadis mixed for Death Cab for Cutie. Now, on this session, if you're not familiar with Peter Cadis, you should check out his discography, but it's crazy. And he is known for this kind of real band sound. It's, you could call it indie or you could call it, organic or whatever you want to call it, but it's like real band sound as opposed to, something with overly done with samples or something, not real instruments. This guy loves to make drum sound real. Everything is thick. He's using lots of analog gear to get there, but he also has a whole in the box workflow. And he has worked on things solely in the box. He did an entire national album all in the box. What I'm about to do is describe this whole thing and then give you the translation for how you could use this to work in the box like I do. I work all in the box now, and there was a time when I didn't think that working in the box was feasible or possible or was something I ever wanted to do. There's lots of things I think that people learn from working out of the box with analog gear that people who work solely in the box their whole life never really pick up. So if you just bear with me till the end, we'll get there. And I'm telling you, you'll pick up at least one thing that will make your mixes better by the end of this. So let's move through what Peter Cadis is doing on the song Kids in 99. First step is he's taking all of his tracks and sending them out to analog gear. Now, the exact gear he's using, I don't think is extremely important, but I'm going to just run through what it is so that you know, because I find it interesting to know these things, so I'm hoping you guys do too. He's sending all his drums, after he's done some processing in the box, all his drums go to an API 2500. Let me just pull up what these things look like so everyone's familiar with what they look like. This is an API 2500. Now, a big reason people use this is because it has a lot of tone and character. I'm going to leave it there. Using the makeup gain on this thing is one of the most popular things people do to add flavor to a song because it doesn't just add clean gain. It sort of has character. Now, on bass, he's using an Animod 660. Now, like I said, any sort of substitutes for anything like this will do because the way I look at that is he's using these because he owns them and he likes them. But I'm sure he would trade them out for other things if he was in a place that had other things. So this is what he's using on bass. He says he's not hitting it very hard. Then on guitars, the Pendulum Audio 6386. It's a tube limiter. Now, if you're looking for something in plug-in form to mimic something like this, go with a Fairchild plugin of some kind. I'm particular to the Unfairchild. Also, a lot of people love LA3As on guitars. So keys, he's got a Neve 33609. This was Andrew Shep's compressor of choice for his rear bus for a long time. And it's Michael Brower's compressor of choice for his bus A of his subgroups, which got all his vocals. It has like a kind of a sheen and a shine to it in a way. Andrew Sheps notoriously said he stopped using it because he got sick of the sound of it. All of these things are being sent from the computer to these pieces of gear. So you need to use converters to go that way. Now, digital to analog converters, he doesn't mention exactly what converters he uses to send, but I saw in his racks he's got burls on burls on burls. So probably the burl converters are what he's using to send to these pieces of gear. And if you notice, there's no vocals here. Where's the vocals? He's just sending the vocals out into his summing mixer along with that's where all these go. Drums, bass, guitars, and keys also get to his summing mixer, but the vocals have no compressor on them because the vocals are being treated in the box, so he has the most control over them. That was his logic, and I hear you because these other things, keep in mind, he doesn't change the settings. I mentioned this a lot, and it was a big reason why, I was kind of torn when I used summing and analog gear. I was like, I can't ever touch this stuff because then I have to write down everything I do and it's harder to recall. So it just makes it where you want to set it, just leave it. And that's what he's doing. He's setting it, leaving it, not touching it for all those things so that he can recall things easily. So he'll control the level going in. He'll do things to the signal before it gets in so that it gets in at the right level, but he's not touching the gear. And to me, that was a big thing I used to always say is, I refuse to buy another piece of gear I can't touch. It's like, man, it looks pretty over there with the lights and the one way I set it once and I can't ever touch it. I hated that. He's taking all of these signals and they're summing through a fat bustard. If you know what the fat bustard is, you already know. Austin Powers, it's not the fat bastard, it's the fat busted. And this is what we got. Boom. Looks like that. It's his favorite summing mixer, and for good reason. If anybody's ever used one of these, they sound very cool. Fat Bustard is going to go into the Phoenix, which is a thermionic culture compressor, and it's a very mu compressor. I like to show people what these look like because then maybe you'll recognize them when you see them in other people's studios or in other people's racks. Instead of that, if we were going to use plugins, because I don't believe there is a Phoenix plugin, the Varimu by Manley is a good solid substitute. Now, don't pay attention to the settings. Sometimes when he uses certain things, like on his mix bus, where after this is over, he comes back in the computer and rocks a mix bus all in the box. That I have settings for. Just bear with me. The Manley Varimu is a good substitute for the Phoenix because they're both Varimu compressors. All right, so now let's move on. The bus comp, the SSL bus comp, is what I have as a substitute for what he does next, which is the Obsidian. The Obsidian by Dramastic Audio. Now, this thing looks like this, which is basically an SSL bus comp. That's really what it is, but with a slightly different sound and a little more tweakability. It's basically all it is. The Fat Bustard, which takes all his signals in. He's getting his vocals into that, drums, bass, keys, all of it. Guitars also. He's running all of this into the Phoenix. And then this next thing, the Obsidian, which is, like I said, the SSL bus comp, and pretty much. And then it's hitting a Studer A820. Now, that's a tape machine. He's using this thing like for the electronics within it to give him a little bit of a sound. But he's also mainly, the biggest purpose of it is to monitor the levels on the VU meters. He's like, I know it's right. And what I mean by right, I know the levels from everything that I'm hitting coming into this. I know it's all right when this is dipping into the red. Note the language, dipping into the red. So that means it doesn't live in the red. It's not slammed some of the time at the loudest part of the song. Dipping into the red some of the time at the loudest part of the song. So that's the point. When he's basically looking at it, noting that the thing wasn't living in the red the whole time, but every once in a while, it would get up into the red a little bit at the loudest parts of the song. So that just kind of tells you that he's really using the tape machine to make sure the levels are proper because they work better when they're the proper levels. All the analog gear works better like that. Now, what I'm basically saying is you can't ignore this in the box. There's just no reason why we should be thinking everything can always be as loud as we want it to be. And all you got to sort of maintain a hold back mentality and hit things probably a little less hard than you're hitting them in order to maintain a result at the end that's great. Because I don't really understand why people do this, but I did it too. So I know people do, where they want everything to be like at the top of the meter the whole way. Like everything, every part of every track, like as loud as we can get it without it clipping, and then we'll get something better at the end. I think that's honestly a problem. Most likely it's creating a problem within your mix where you're choking things that you don't even realize how much you're choking them because it's happening all over the place. As a good substitute, I was like, well, the Studer, A820 is similar to the A800, and we love this plugin. So just put this on at that point and monitor the level in here. There's a magic to VU meters that don't exist on digital meters because there's a rise time, a fall time. There's all these like different elements that go into a VU meter. And they did a pretty good job on a plugin like this of emulating that. But VUs will look different when things happen. They don't catch the fastest stuff. It's kind of more of an average is how I like to think about it. So as a result, when you start looking at your mix, rather than looking and staring at a LUFS meter or something, when you start looking at things on this level, you get a whole different perspective. They are helped by those VU meters a lot. So I would put something like this on because this is not quite his last step. It's his second to last step. And just look at what it's doing. And if it just dips into the red every once in a while at the loudest part of the song, your gain staging is okay. It's probably going to sound okay. And if it's not, adjust accordingly. All right, little less input, whatever you need to do to make this where you're not hitting everything crazy hard all the time. Moving on, the next thing he has is an analog peak limiter by Pendulum Audio. Every limiter has a sound. Use what you got. If you got a FabFilter Pro L2, use that. You know, the point of the analog peak limiter by Pendulum, it doesn't have the effects, the negative effects that a brick wall limiter might have. So it looks like this. This is, if you've ever seen this piece of gear, you know what it's like. And it has two modes, the JFET and the MOSFET, and they both sort of attack the sound a little differently. Now, wouldn't you know it, he doesn't actually mention what analog converter he's using, but by looking and studying the racks, I could tell you it's most likely a Burl. I know he has a B2 Bomber, so it's probably that, but it also could be the Dave Hill, which is the Crane Song 192 Quantum. Now, this thing is, I don't want to go too long into this thing, but what an interesting piece of kit this is. Because it's not only a converter, but it also has like some tape flavors to it. It's got your tape, your pentode, your triode, so it saturates in a very interesting way in addition to being a converter. So Dave Hill, unfortunately no longer with us, but a brilliant mind, and this is called the Head. And this thing was extremely popular by the guys in the know, and it's in his rack. So point is, it's probably the B2 because I heard him mention on when he was working on a national project using a B2 and that he likes it, the B2 Bomber. And I saw the racks of Burl stuff in the mothership he has. So I'm like, it's probably Burl, but maybe it could be that Head, it's possible. So let's move on. Once all that happens, he's in the box now. Now, you would expect, after doing all those things, how much more do you need? Well, let's not forget, this is coming from the guy with 7 de-essers, right? So 7 de-essers on a vocal, if you count the multiband like that he was also using, all right, so he's doing a lot of stuff, but his theme is little bit. So I want everyone to ignore the idea that using too much is a thing. If you use it hardly at all, meaning the needle hardly moves, but you are that in tune to hear that it's doing something, then using a little bit on multiple things may do a lot better for you than using, 2, 3, 4 dB of gain reduction on one thing. Because that, even 2, 3, 4 dB, that's not that much. But a lot of times, seeing the needle move at all means the thing's actually working a little too hard, especially with plugins. There's a lot of plugins that work like that. The Chandler Zener limiter works like that. So if you see the needle moving, it's probably already doing a lot. And if you barely see it moving at all, it's still doing something. So it's just, that's how that stuff works. Certain things are super aggressive, and there's a lot of them, and I don't want to go into all of them, but there's a lot of those. DBX is another one. The Shadow Hills is another one. Anyway, let's move on. What he's doing in the box. He's got a little EQ. Now, I noticed he likes to do this, so let's talk flavors here. He's taking a low shelf around 80 hertz and rolling a little bit off. I'm sure it's not an all-the-time thing, but he's doing that. He's also 200 hertz, half a dB off, 300 hertz, half a dB off. And this is a theme because on a couple songs I saw him do, this was what he was doing. Like 200, 300, 80 hertz low shelf, and something up top, 11.9K. So, I like to pick up the patterns. This was done on more than one song, so I have a feeling he likes these numbers. So just keep those in mind. 11.9K, a little high shelf, and then he's reducing by half dB at 300, 200, and 80 hertz on a low shelf also, okay? So these are not shelves. This is the shelf, obviously. Now let's move on. Mag EQ4. Mag EQ4, he's got a 2 dB boost at 10K. So even though he's boosting a little bit at, about 1 dB at 11.9K, he's also boosting at 10K, about 2 dB on the Mag. Now, if you're familiar with the Mag, you already know, but this thing has a cool sound also. Everything like this, all the algorithms are slightly different. They have a different sound. I recommend testing these things out. It's not a one-fix-all pony for anything, but they really do work some wonders. And again, this is sort of a theme of his. He likes this chain on his in the box EQ once he's come back into the computer. After that, on the Death Cab song, he did not have this, but on the National song I saw, he did. So I just want to show you guys what that looks like. This is his Pro MB, and he had basically the -6 dB range here is what happens when you just click. So he's doing pretty much as little as possible on the just click. Like, could you adjust this? Sure, you could. But the point is, when you just click the thing on an MB, it goes down to the -6 dB range. It just defaults to that. And these were his settings. Somewhere around 60 hertz it was set at, somewhere, and that's, on the low shelf deal. Somewhere over here around 585, okay? And then somewhere over here around 2.8K, around that zone. So, like I said, though, this was not on his mix bus on the Death Cab song, but it was on the National track that I saw him do. So API 2500 he has after this. So in other words, Pro Q3 into the Mag 4 EQ. Now we're dealing with compression and flavor. So we get to the API 2500, which again, we know he likes. He was boosting a little bit of makeup gain because there's a flavor there. The threshold he had set at medium. The detector set at medium over here. The ratio where it defaults, which is right in the middle. And then the attack on the slow side, not all the way, but one click back, and the release as fast as it goes. Percent link, he was at 80, and the filter shape, the BP was on. So these settings are all exactly from what he was using, so that everyone's on the same page. And he was boosting the makeup gain a bit. ATR 102, this happens after his API compression. These were the settings he used, and he was at 250 for the tape, basically the oldest tape they make, plus 7.5 on the flux, which means how hard you hit the tape, plus 7.5, and then 1-inch tape. Noise off, wow and flutter was off, crosstalk was on, the transformers were on, all right? The auto cal is off. I bet he would be flipping through this to decide what he likes the best, but 250 plus 7.5 on the cal, you're hitting the tape pretty hot at that point, 1-inch tape. Because all these things have a sound. So I recommend playing with this to see the difference as you manipulate it. But 250 often will saturate the quickest, break up earlier at the lower numbers. GP9 was like the newest version of tape, pretty much. And 250 is the oldest version. So that's like the most basic explanation I could give to run through this thing. Throw up just a VU meter, literally just the Waves VU or UAD VU or any kind of just VU. So you could start looking at how your mix sounds based on what the VU meter is telling you as well. It's not, I'm not saying mix with your eyes. What I'm really saying is you got to use that also to start understanding what it is when you like it. So that means if you do a mix that's all messed up, look at the VU. You could learn from that. If you do a mix that sounds right to you, look at a VU and see what it's doing before the mix bus. You could use that to learn from too. That was a big thing that I picked up was, I can really make the stuff sound probably a lot less choked if I were to be a little more conservative with volume, and I don't have to worry about it if I think about the rest of this stuff, which for me is after putting on those kind of flavors, a little makeup gain on the 2500, for example, the API, a little bit on the ATR, I'm bringing level up a little bit. Now, what are we doing? He's got multiple limiters. So this is also why he doesn't give a toot about what's going on with limited, like what the volume is, because he's boosting 1 dB of input gain. He's taking down 1 dB on the output trim. He has the enhanced curve on 50, safe mode is on, and the auto gain is on. Now, experiment with these settings. Also, his attack, I noticed, was super fast. All right, now this song it has that like organic, real, old school kind of flavor to it. So I found it interesting. At least that's how I would describe the song, right? Kids in 99. And then I saw that, like the attack being so quick, I was like, that's interesting. It's almost like a much quicker attack than I would use typically and a slower release. And I was like, he dialed in the release probably for the groove to really get it to sit the way he wanted. But the soft knee was completely off and, enhanced curve at 50%. And a lot of people will tell you, oh, they're supposed to be run at 100 and they read the manual, and forget all that nonsense. Forget what the manual tells you it should be. Nobody wrote that to say this is always how it has to be. It's the same for the next plugin on here. So he's got this one. Also, check this out. Weird, and I just like to note things that I find a little weird, and I'll just leave it at that. He had dither on at 16-bit for this. I don't know if he just forgot it there or what, but he was dithering the first limiter at 16, and then we have an Oxford inflator, 0 dB, 0 dB, 35% on the effect. The clip at 0 is on. Curve is right at 0, okay? And again, this is a thing that a lot of people say it should be run different. You got to do this, whatever. Don't listen. Just try the stuff for your own ears. See what you like based on what you're being, what the song is that you're feeding into it. That'll tell you everything you need to know. Don't listen to anybody tell you it's got to be any way, because this guy's making records that are doing things, and he had it set like this. So it's like, again, 35% on the effect. Interesting. Now, this is what I was going to say before. L2, just keep in mind, I'm going to say this first, then I'm going to explain the rest of the settings. 24-bit dither. I was like, what? He's dithering twice? Like, I didn't get it. But like I said, maybe he forgot it. Maybe it's just the way he rolls. I don't know, because we don't have ultimate access to ask everybody everything, But we do know 24-bit dither on the last limiter, and these were all on. I'm not saying he chose. He had these all on. And the threshold, -3.5, output ceiling, -0.5. So this was doing approximately 2.8 dB of gain reduction at the loudest parts of the song. The rest of the time, it was in the neighborhood of -2 dB. So it was doing a little bit, but this was the one that was being hit probably the hardest out of everything. Those three in a row. Now what he said is this. That's not it. He then takes another limiter and bumps 5 dB up on the input to be able to get it a little bit louder yet and get it close to where mastering is. Now, this was a thing he said he's battling with currently, is that what he was doing was putting this particular limiter on, which is the UAD precision limiter. He was putting this on and then taking it off before he sent to mastering. But what happened was the mastering guy would send things back, and something in particular would always sound different. The snare would get totally morphed. Sometimes it would sound muddier. Sometimes it would sound more covered. Sometimes it would sound more open. It would change the sound of what everyone was used to, what the band approved, and what they had been struggling and stressing and working on and getting as great as they could and okayed the mix on, and now it was totally different when they would remove this. So what he said is he's really battling with this concept, and he's leaning towards not taking off anything now and literally hoping the mastering engineer has to do nothing. Literally has to do hardly anything, because not that he doesn't want to get his stuff mastered, but he just doesn't want to have the sound change on him, and everyone would get comfortable with the way it sounded with this limiter at the end, and it'd be totally different when the mastering engineer rebuilt it. So in other words, this is something I've stressed. Every limiter sounds different. You got to realize that whatever you put on, if it's this flavor of limiter, you're changing your snare sound by switching that out for something else or by removing it before mastering. Now, on this particular song, he was clamped way down with the output. All right. Now, I don't exactly know if he was clamped down like -10 dB on the output because he needed that for the version that everyone was approving before mastering, or if he had to do that because he wasn't happy with how it sounded after mastering because it sounded different. So he had to lower this to kind of give the guy more headroom again, but keep the sound he liked in the snare and all that by leaving the limiter on. That's sort of unclear. In the song he did for the National, he had this cranked to 0 dB. So just keeping that in mind. All right. That's about it for how this guy works. Now, I just think for someone like me, and maybe you guys who work all in the box, hearing someone on his level using all this gear can at first seem kind of daunting. It can seem like, how are we ever going to get there with what we have in the box? I don't look at it like that at all. If I did, I wouldn't be mixing all in the box. I switched to this idea of mixing in the box because I love the fact that it's just a question of making the puzzle pieces fit together in the same way that his fit together based on flavors. And because there's an unlimited amount of choices of flavors, especially when you don't have to spend thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to get a choice, we could sit there and experiment with all sorts of different combinations of things to achieve a sound we want. Now, the other thing is no one's ever going to tell you what's exactly right or wrong because there is no right or wrong. So you might as well experiment with different things, get comfortable with different things, and also beat up a few things that you really know. In other words, pick whatever your favorite 4 compressors are and put those on those buses. Then send those all to your mix bus, and then instead of using whatever it is, like these 2 EQs, if you don't like those, use your favorite EQs. Use the ones you're the most comfortable with. But use them with this thought process of 2 different ones because each one does do a little different thing. You can't just boost on a Pro Q3 all in a bunch of places and get the same flavor as you could out of 2 different EQs. So he's doing that for a reason. In addition, the API 2500 has a flavor. If you've never tried it, try it. But if you're familiar with a Fairchild and you love that on your mix bus or whatever you like, put whatever you like in plug-in form on your mix bus and just get the most out of it. Mainly pay attention to what a VU meter is doing and where the needle is sitting before and after your mix bus, and then go check things in other places, on a Bluetooth speaker, in the car. Compare it to other things, other finished records that sound great to you, that you know what they sound like, and just use that to add to your palette of, okay, now I have another way to decide if things are good or bad while I'm listening. Because another thing Peter Kadish stressed that I thought was great was that, he came clean with the fact that he's like, look, sometimes, especially when he was starting out, he used to make mixes that he would feel like were great. He would get comments back from people and they'd say, hey, there's too much of this and that or the other thing. And then he would make those changes. Then he'd compare the revised version to what he did first and be like, wow, on the same monitors, like this, they were totally right. Like this is totally wrong. His original was totally wrong. And he realized that sometimes you just get too focused and fixated on something on your project to really be able to know that you got too much low mids or too much low end or too much mud or it's too bright, or you just get too hyper focused on it, which is why we stress breaks like every 45 minutes or an hour and a half or 2 hours, whatever you like. You got to take at least a couple minute break to then settle, get your head straight, come back, listen to something else before you got to clear it out, rinse that. Shake the Etch-a-Sketch, come back, and then you got a new perspective, and hopefully you'll be able to kind of find those problems. Anything you guys learn, throw it in the comments. Anything else you want me to talk about that maybe I went over too quickly or you want a more in-depth something on, let me know. I appreciate it. Evan Jaffe, Custom Cut Studios. You guys got this. Take it easy.